Okay, I think it's working. If it's not, I'll just have to repeat everything I'm about to say. So, nimitz. As Madi mentioned, and as you'll probably recall, a couple of years ago I got up here and started yammering on about a concrete submarine underneath our clubhouse deck. And at the end of that talk, Marilyn approached me at the podium and asked me to look into nimitz. And what I assumed she meant was look into his involvement with the club, because I knew about this picture that he autographed. It says, what does it say? It says, "To the Berkeley Yacht Club with best wishes, C.W. Nimitz, Fleet Admiral." And I knew about this letter that used to be hanging on the wall in the pool room. I actually found it today upstairs in the office behind a rack of fermenting equipment. So not the most ideal place for it to be on display, but the letter says, "Dear Commodore Cutter." Commodore Cutter is the guy with the pipe on the wall if you look up as you're going into the bar room. "I thank you very much for your letter of 27 March and your invitation to become an honorary member of the Berkeley Yacht Club. I accept with pleasure. Thank you and your fellow members for the great courtesy you have extended us. With best wishes, C.W. Nimitz." So I knew he was an honorary member, and I knew he lived in Berkeley on Santa Barbara Road. But that was kind of all I knew about his involvement in the club, and I actually didn't even know much about him, his career or anything. Like I knew he was the Admiral at Midway from a Henry Fonda movie. And I knew he had a freeway here named after him and a bridge in San Diego named after him. But other than that, my mental image of him was pretty much this. And I thank my lucky stars that I'm not so young that my mental image of him is this. So Mark Bird was just asking me who I would cast as Nimitz if I were going to make a movie about him today. Definitely not that guy. I see that guy and I think natural born killers. So these are the movies that really were all I knew about Nimitz. The first one is the Henry Fonda one I mentioned. It's a great one. You know, my mental image of Nimitz was Henry Fonda telling Hal Holbrook, "I want that fourth carrier." And I think that movie is the better movie. Don't tell anybody on the Hornet I said that, because one of their docents was the advisor on this newer movie. And I think the newer movie probably is more historically accurate. I think all the characters in that movie actually existed. Charlton Heston's character in the Midway movie definitely did not exist, but I still think it's a better movie. The big difference is that the one on the right there is more of an action movie, and the one on the left is more about the stress of command. And so what I was hoping to find was basically information about his life in Berkeley after the war, specifically anything having to do with the yacht club. And I really didn't find much, but the only way that I could really go about it was to just start looking into his story. And as it turns out, the definitive biography of Nimitz is this book by E.B. Potter. It's on the pool table. I plan to donate both of these books to the club library, but if you don't want to wait, you can scan that QR code and it'll take you to the Amazon page to buy the book. The Potter book is the definitive biography. Nimitz's wife, Catherine, actually commissioned E.B. Potter to write this after his death. Nimitz wouldn't allow a biography to be written about him while he was still alive, because he didn't want the focus to be on him. But E.B. Potter was asked by Catherine Nimitz to write the biography after he died. E.B. Potter was the naval historian at Annapolis. And that other book I just happened to pick up and read on a flight across the country. It's a short book, but it's got some really interesting stories in there. And so they're both on the pool table, or you can buy them on Amazon here, but I highly recommend both of them. So as for the Berkeley Yacht Club, this was the only piece of evidence I found that he had ever set foot in the club. This is an article from the Berkeley Gazette from 1951, same year that's on that letter that he dated in March of 1951, where he attended a Christmas party and I guess he showed some movies. But that was the only evidence I saw that he ever came to the club. But what I thought I'd do with this talk is tell the story of his life and his career and point out some of the things that sounded very Berkeley to me along the way. So if you were hoping for a scholarly work on this, I'm afraid I'm going to have to disappoint you. This is going to be more of a Comedy Central kind of thing. So his early life, he was born Chester William Nimitz on February 24th of 1885 in a town called Fredericksburg, Texas. It's in the hill country, kind of west of Austin. And 1885, just keep that date in the back of your mind. So he was mostly, his father died shortly after he was born, and he was mostly raised by his paternal grandfather, who was also named Chester. And that guy was an old merchant mariner who operated a hotel that he built in the shape of a steamboat. And that is the picture of the hotel today-ish. It is now the National Museum of the Pacific War. They wanted it to be a museum about Nimitz, but he wouldn't hear of it. Like I said, he didn't want it to be about him. So it became a museum dedicated to the Pacific War. And I believe Mark and Marty have actually been here. Does it still look like that?
Yeah.
So I've never been there. Texas is really hot 10 months out of the year. I don't want to go there outside of January. So while he was growing up there, he met some passing soldiers who stayed at the hotel, and he learned about West Point and decided he wanted to go there. And so to get into West Point, you actually need a letter of recommendation from your congressman. And his San Antonio congressman had already promised away all the nominations to other influential families in the area and asked him if he was interested in the Naval Academy. And for reasons very similar to what's on my t-shirt, he had never heard of the Naval Academy. But certainly his grandfather thought it was a great idea. And so he embraced the idea, and the community rallied around him to get him ready, get the basic high schools out of the way. Apparently back then you needed to have an understanding of calculus to get admitted to Annapolis. I actually had a classmate of mine go to Annapolis, and he was not in my calculus class, so I don't know if that's actually true anymore. But anyway, he went to Annapolis, and by all accounts, he did pretty well. This picture on the right here is a picture of him as a midshipman swabbing the deck. It's very blurry, but it's also very old. He graduated in 1905, 6 months early, and he was an appointed officer. They called them passed midshipmen. The Navy was very short on officers at the time, so they didn't commission them ensigns right away. They called them passed midshipmen, but they did put him into service. And so his first assignment was on the battleship Ohio, sailing out of San Francisco to the Asiatic station. And that boat would later depart again in 1907 to join TR's Great White Fleet. And in 1907, he was promoted to ensign and served on the gunboat Panay. And in 1909, he was given his first command of a destroyer called the Decatur. He was tasked with delivering it to the yard for maintenance. And that is a picture of the Decatur a few years before he took command of it. And so, while entering Batangas Harbor, south of Manila, he estimated his position instead of taking bearings and ran the boat aground. And so he was court-martialed for this, and he cited this as a time when he remembered his grandfather's advice, that being to never worry about the things you can't control. He just calmly ordered that a deck chair be brought on deck, and he kept watch overnight until the tide lifted them off the bottom, and then they were underway again. And when I read that, I think running aground and being all casual about it is very Berkeley Yacht Club. So after the Decatur court-martial, he was relieved of command, obviously, and returned to the U.S. And in 1909, it didn't seem to affect his career any. In 1909, he began training with the 1st Submarine Flotilla and was given command of the flotilla in May of that year, with additional duty on the USS Plunger, which is arguably the greatest name for a submarine ever. And in 1910, he was promoted to lieutenant. He skipped the rank of JG, and he was ordered to the Boston Navy Yard in 1911 to assist in the refitting of the skipjack. And that's where he met Catherine Vance Freeman, who he would later marry. The story goes that Catherine's older sister was sort of the prize debutante of the area, and everyone wanted a date with her. And so she happened to be out on a date the night that Nimitz was invited over to their house for bridge, and Catherine had to stand in for her older sister. And as it turned out, the two of them were soulmates. So he began courting her and later married her in April of 1913. And he continued to serve as a submariner and as commander of the Atlantic Submarine Flotilla in Boston until 1913. And of course, as we know, submarines are very Berkeley. So later in 1913, he studied diesel engines in Connecticut on the oil tanker Maumee, and then was sent overseas to Nuremberg and Ghent to study over there. I don't know if you know this, but the diesel engine, like so many great feats of engineering, was a German invention. The guy's name was Rudolf Diesel. And so in 1913, I believe the patent had just expired, and the diesel engine was starting to get used a lot to replace the steam engine. And so Nimitz went over to Nuremberg and Ghent on behalf of the Navy, and conveniently he spoke fluent German, having grown up in a German settlement in Texas. And then in August 1916, he returned to New York and was promoted to lieutenant commander. In October, he became XO and engineering officer on the Maumee at her commissioning, and he oversaw the first underway refueling operations of the first squadron of destroyers to cross the Atlantic for World War I. Just bear with me a second, my throat's getting dry here. Where was I? So in February 1918, he was promoted to commander and reported to the Office of the Chief of Naval Operations, also becoming a senior member of the Board of Submarine Design. Then in 1920, they sent him all the way out to Pearl Harbor to build a submarine base. He spent a couple years out there building a base that would obviously become pretty important later. In 1922, he had to go all the way back to the East Coast to attend the Naval War College in Rhode Island. And the Naval War College is sort of where they send you when they're kind of grooming you for the flag officer ranks. They're expecting you might be an admiral someday if you're going to the War College. So he was learning a lot about logistics and fleet movements and that sort of thing. Then in 1924, back to the West Coast, down in San Pedro to experiment with the circular formation. And at this point, I want to explain to you the importance of the circular formation, but I'm feeling kind of underdressed for this, so bear with me for a second. I think I need to put on some better clothes here. All right, that's better. I think I better put on a pair of these too. And let's see, maybe one of these. And finally, one of these. So now that you can see I am an expert on naval warfare, I can tell you a little bit about the circular formation. So the evolution of naval combat tactics. In the age of fighting sail and fixed cannon, the strategy was fairly simple. You wanted to line your ships up and give the enemy a broadside, and the idea was that you hoped your gunnery was more powerful and more accurate and more frequent than theirs, and you could turn their fleet into splinters before they could do that to you. You were mostly bound by your ability to maneuver with the wind direction, and you couldn't aim your cannons very well, so your best bet was to just fire as many guns as you could at the enemy, and the only way to do that was to line up side by side with them. So that was called line of battle. This picture is an example of the Battle of Lake Erie, where Oliver Hazard Perry met the enemy and they are ours. But with the invention of the steam engine and the swivel turret, the idea was that you wanted to cross the T. And this GIF will loop around in a second. You can see the blue fleet there is crossing in front of the red fleet. They're still all lined up. But now that they have swivel turrets, the blue fleet can pulverize the red fleet, and the red fleet can't bring their aft guns to bear on the blue fleet. So one of the most famous examples of this was Admiral Togo at the Battle of Tsushima. He was able to do it twice against the Russians and just completely obliterate their fleet. And so when Nimitz was studying naval strategy, this was the prevailing theory. What you wanted to do was cross the T. But as soon as airplanes and submarines came into the mix, you could be attacked from any direction suddenly, and lining all your ships up in a row wasn't such a great idea. So there was an evolution of thought here that maybe the ship should be in a circle with concentric rings, and you would put your important ships in the middle of the circle so you had a few layers of defense. It was still thought at the time that battleships were the important ships, and so the battleship would be in the middle, the carriers would be on the outside of the battleships, and then the cruisers, destroyers, and so on. One of the things Nimitz was testing was the idea that maybe the carrier was more important than the battleship and that it should be in the center. But this was the formation that they ended up using a lot in the Pacific War, and I believe they still use it today. And one of the theories is that at any point you can issue a command and your entire fleet can change direction simultaneously. Obviously the ones on the outside of the circle have to speed up a little bit to get back in formation, but at any point the whole fleet can change direction. You don't need to re-line up like you did with line of battle and crossing the T. I'm told by some former coworkers who actually served on destroyers and carrier battle groups that what actually happens is the fleet will be steaming along and the carrier will decide it's time to turn, and the next hour or so is sheer pandemonium as everyone takes evasive maneuvers to get out of the way and then get back into formation. So I've never been with a carrier battle group, but I find that actually fairly easy to believe. I think we recently lost some F-18 Super Hornets off the hangar deck of the Harry S. Truman, and I think the reason was the sudden turn to avoid a Houthi missile. And the plane was being moved below decks in the hangar deck, and it was on a pallet, and with the sudden turn of the ship, it just slid off the side into the water. So I can believe that the maneuvers are not quite as smooth as the Navy would like us to believe. But all of this is to say that the Berkeley Yacht Club actually uses a variant of Nimitz's circular formation every year, especially in the midwinters. And we signal it with this. For those of you who don't race, that flag is called the answering pennant. It signals a postponement of the race, and when we put it up, the entire fleet forms a circle around the most important boat out there. And I'm going to take this stuff off now because it's getting really hot in this leather jacket. I don't know how MacArthur wore this in the tropics. Okay, that's better. So after San Pedro and the circular formation, he came up for his first long-term stay in Berkeley. He started one of the first 12 Naval ROTC units on the campus of Cal. And I actually got these pictures out of the Cal Blue and Gold yearbook, which I found in the Berkeley History Room of the Berkeley Public Library downtown. So you'll see the dates here, 1926 through 1929. He was only there 3 years. And in the 1927 Cal yearbook, there is no mention of the Naval ROTC program. It was so new that I don't think the yearbook organizers even realized that the unit existed. So, but 1928 and 1929, he's in there. You can see he's a commander in 28, and by 1929, he had received his promotion to captain. That is the first graduating an ROTC class of Cal. Sorry for how blurry that is. It's not really any better on my screen.
Colin, I might add that Lloyd Toffey was a member of Cal's Naval ROTC class.
Who?
Lloyd Toffey.
Lloyd Toffey was Naval ROTC at Cal?
Commodore of Berkeley Yacht Club.
Oh.
And husband of my second wife.
Cool. I did not know that. Thank you for sharing.
He was in the naval, and immediately after he got his degree, he immediately had to go into service.
Do you know what year?
No, I don't.
Well, it probably wasn't 1930.
Lloyd, no, the lawyer. Oh, he was an accountant.
So Nimitz is not pictured in this graduating class because he had already moved on to San Diego by this point. Like I said, he had been promoted to captain, and he assumed command of Submarine Division 20 in San Diego. From 1931 to 1938, he was bouncing between San Diego and the Asiatic Fleet. He was given command of the Rigel and the out-of-commission destroyers in San Diego before being given the cruiser Augusta in 1933, which went to the Asiatic station. And then he returned in 1935 to become assistant chief of the Bureau of Navigation before becoming commander of Cruiser Division 2 Battle Force. Then in 1938, he skipped the rank of Commodore. They don't call it Commodore anymore. They call it Lower Rear Admiral or something like that. But basically 1 star used to be Commodore, and he skipped that rank and became a 2-star Rear Admiral, taking command of Battleship Division 1 and conducted the first underway refueling experiments of large ships. And of course, he's not the only BYC officer to skip the rank of Commodore. But this guy became the other type of person who stands in the companionway. So in June of 1939, he became chief of the Bureau of Navigation, and the Bureau of Navigation by that point had sort of become the Navy's HR department. I don't know that they did a whole lot of navigating, it was more bureaucracy. But he was based in Washington, D.C., and that's where he was when, on that date that will live in infamy, when Pearl Harbor was attacked. And when that happened, he was junior to a lot of admirals in the Navy, but FDR ordered the Secretary of the Navy to tell Nimitz to get the hell out to Pearl and stay there until the war is won. So on December 25th, 1941, Christmas Day, after a transcontinental train ride and a stormy flight across the Pacific, he arrived at Pearl and took command, receiving the promotion to 4-star rank on New Year's Eve, skipped the Vice Admiral rank. And since all of the battleships were sunk or damaged and the carriers had put to sea, he didn't have a whole lot of ships to choose from to hoist his flag on, so he chose a submarine, the USS Grayling. And that is the Grayling a few years before he did so. And that is a picture of the ceremony where he's taking command. And so 1942 proved to be a pretty busy year. He was Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet and Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Ocean Area. Those were two different positions, but he held both of them. And just a little side note, that CNC notation, it used to be that the Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Fleet was abbreviated CINC-US and pronounced CINCUS. And after Pearl Harbor, they didn't think that was a good thing to call their Commander-in-Chief, the Pacific Fleet, or the U.S. Fleet. So they changed the designation to COMINCH. But CINCPAC and CINCPOA still kept the CNC designation. Just an amusing piece of trivia there. So, of course, in 1942, you're probably familiar with the Doolittle raid. It was launched off the Hornet. And they loaded up a bunch of Army planes on the Hornet in Alameda here and went out, and they bombed Tokyo and ditched over China. And from a military standpoint, it was a completely pointless exercise, but for morale, it did wonders. It was sort of the first time we hit back against the Japanese. And then a little while later, we had an engagement in the Coral Sea, which was a qualified success. We stopped the Japanese advance, but we got our butts kicked, really. And then June 4th, 1942, the battle that he's famous for, Midway, that was our first real victory against Japan. And man, did we get lucky. We were fairly sure that they were going to attack Midway. We had been decoding their messages, and we were pretty sure that Midway was their target. But there was a big storm. We didn't know where they were coming from. There was a feint in the Aleutian Islands, and we didn't quite know where to put our carriers. We were outnumbered. We basically had 2.5 carriers because the Enterprise was so damaged from the Battle of the Coral Sea, and the Japanese had 4 or 5, and we got lucky. We found them first, and we were able to attack them when their decks were full of planes that were getting ready to bomb the runway at Midway. They weren't equipped to attack the carriers, and there was a lot of confusion in the Japanese fleet, and we were able to take out 4 of their carriers and stop their advance, and the Japanese were never able to fully recover from that. They fought like hell for the rest of the war, but they never really made any more advancements after that.
Weren't 2 of those carriers involved in Pearl Harbor? I remember something like that. Of the 2 weeks that were damaged, I think 2 of them were involved in Pearl Harbor. It was real morale.
Yeah, I think so. I think they were, what were they, Yorktown and Lexington and Enterprise were the 3.
That's our 3, but
Yeah.
I don't remember the names of the 2.
Yeah, I'm afraid I don't either. By the way, I've been working on this for 2 years. I've forgotten most of what I learned by now. So also in June of 1942, Catherine decided that being in Washington was a little too far away from Pearl Harbor. Catherine and Chester were writing letters to each other every day, and having those letters had to go from Pearl Harbor to Washington, so that was taking a little too long for her liking, so she decided to move out west to cut that travel time in half for those letters. So she packed up their youngest daughter, and then their second youngest daughter was out of the house by that point, but decided to make the trek across country with them. And so she drove across the country in the family car. And I don't know if this is the car she used, but it was the only picture of her with a family car that I could find. So, by the way, not really relevant to the theme of my talk, but Chester and Catherine had 4 children. The oldest was also named Catherine Vance. And the second oldest was Chester Jr., and he also went to the academy and I believe he became an admiral. He did not become a fleet admiral, but I think he became an admiral, and he was a submariner. And then their third daughter was, they called her Nancy. Her name was Anna Elizabeth, I think. And their youngest daughter, Mary, became a nun and taught biology at Stanford, which is not very Berkeley. So after Midway, we launched the Guadalcanal campaign, and as you can see by these dates, that took a little while. That did not go quite so well. And so by November, we were getting a little impatient, and so Nimitz flew to San Francisco to discuss how things were going and what they could do differently, and he took one of these types of planes. Unfortunately, he picked up a tailwind and arrived early, and they hadn't cleared the landing area in the Seaplane Lagoon yet of Flotsam. And upon landing, he hit a log and pitch-poled, and that killed most of the people on the plane. One of those books I have out on the coffee table claims that Lyndon Johnson was going to be one of those passengers, but turned down the offer for a ride at the last minute, and the guy sitting in his seat was killed in this crash.
Our local Seaplane Lagoon?
Yep, down in Alameda. So after that incident, the Navy got a little bit more rigid about clearing out that Seaplane Lagoon ahead of time. But yeah, that nearly cost us our admiral. And when I read that, my first thought was, who's had to alter course to avoid colliding with a log on San Francisco Bay? Anybody ever actually hit a log? I have. So yeah, this is a picture of a log on the Berkeley Circle taken by Glenn Garfien in the last Midwinter series. Very common. So Guadalcanal, as I mentioned, took a long time. We got our butts kicked there again, at least from the Navy point of view. The Marines kicked some ass on shore, and I think that battle is probably the source of most of the animosity between the Marines and the Navy. The Navy had to retreat, and they left the Marines on the island, and the Marines fought it out gallantly. But the Navy really got its butt kicked. And so that was a test, but eventually we were able to secure Guadalcanal. And then in 1943, things started to slow down a little bit. There was the Battle of Tarawa, there was the Marianas Turkey Shoot, and then in 1944, Leyte Gulf. But I think most of Nimitz's major battles at that point were with MacArthur. He and MacArthur did not see eye to eye. MacArthur wanted to retake the Philippines and go up from the south, and the Navy and Nimitz favored an island hopping strategy where they would just bypass a lot of the Japanese strongholds and isolate them and starve them out essentially. But they wanted to do an island hopping thing and just go straight to Japan. And MacArthur, with his personality, didn't like the idea of his command not being at the forefront. So he and Nimitz had quite a bit of friction there. And then in December of 1944, he was promoted to Fleet Admiral. There were only 4 admirals to ever achieve the 4-star rank, 5 generals and 4 admirals. And the only reason that Congress promoted them that high was to make sure that the other Allied commanders wouldn't try and pull rank. You had personalities like Montgomery in Europe and the Russian admiral, I can't recall his name right now, but they basically, having fought the whole Pacific War pretty much alone, didn't want any of the Allies to take over now that the hard battles were won, or at least what they thought were the hard battles were won. And so they promoted a few people to the 5-star rank so that the Allies couldn't claim superior rank. But anyway, Nimitz was the 3rd admiral to receive 5 stars. The first 2 were Bill Leahy, who was FDR's advisor and right-hand man, and the second was Ernest King, who was the chief of naval operations, Nimitz's boss. And then the fourth was Bull Halsey. And he probably, that one's a little harder to explain. A lot of people feel that Race Bruins deserved that fourth five-star promotion, but Bill Halsey had a personality kind of similar to MacArthur. He was a hard charger, and he was easy to make into a poster boy, and I think the Navy just kind of felt like that's what they needed in their five-star admiral, especially since Nimitz was such a, oh, what's the word? I want to say reasonable, but not a prima donna. So anyway, that's just my 2 cents on the 4 or 5-star admirals. And of course, the five-star generals were, let's see, George Marshall, Eisenhower, MacArthur, Omar Bradley, and the 5th one was actually, he was Army at the time of his promotion, but it was Hap Arnold. He was head of the Army Air Corps, and later he became an Air Force general. So he's the only Air Force guy to ever have a 5-star rank. But those were the only 5-star ranks in the history of the United States Armed Forces. So anyway, after his promotion to Fleet Admiral in December, and given the constant battles with MacArthur, he decided to move his headquarters to Guam to be a little closer to the action, both with the Japanese and with MacArthur. And he actually began to relax a little bit. He started wearing shorts with his uniform, and he liked to go shirtless. And that, of course, is a very BYC thing, right, Carl? And so then in 1945, the war's kind of winding down a little bit. There's a couple battles there you might have heard of some importance. My grandfather was actually at both of these battles, driving a Higgins boat, bringing munitions ashore for the Marines. And then some fireworks in August over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And finally, the surrender on board the Missouri in Tokyo Bay. And you look at that date, September 1945, you'll recall he took command on Christmas Day of 1941. That's pretty much a BYC ladder campaign right there. So all you staff Commodores, think about what you accomplished in your 4 years. I'm sure it was a very similar level of stress. And so after the war, he became the chief of naval operations. There was a lot of politicking there. Everyone in Washington wanted their man in that office, so he didn't stay long. But that was always sort of his goal, was to become the chief of naval operations. And in 1947, he retired from that office, and I put that in quotes because 5-star ranks never technically retire. They stay on the payroll as active duty for the rest of their lives. But his role became largely ceremonial after that point. He decided to move back to Berkeley. He moved into the Claremont Hotel, and he was assigned as a special assistant to the Secretary of the Navy in the Western Sea Frontier. And in May of 1948, he bought his house up on Santa Barbara Street and called it Longview. I think those pictures make it pretty clear why. And he paid $32,500 for it. I punched that into a present value calculator, and that's about $430,000 today, $436,000 I think it was. So if anybody knows of a 5-bedroom house in the Berkeley Hills for $436,000, I would love to talk to you. There's a picture of one of the yards in the house. I got this off a real estate website. I haven't actually been there. It's tempting to go knock on the door, but I don't think I'd be welcome. And then that's another picture of the other yard, I guess. And so his life in Berkeley, from 1948 to 1956, he was a UC Regent appointed by Governor Earl Warren. You may have heard that name. From 1949 to 1953, he was also a UN-appointed plebiscite administrator trying to broker a peace between India and Pakistan over Kashmir. He was not successful. I think Pakistan accepted him as the moderator, but India did not. And then in 1951, Harry Truman appointed him as the chair of the loyalty board during the Red Scare. Amusingly, in one of the Berkeley Gazette articles I found, the author of the article claimed that as of April 6th that year, all that board had managed to do was blow most of their budget on rent. And I thought, that sounds very Berkeley. And then ironically, in November of 1951, as a UC regent, he voted against the loyalty oath program at the UC. So now all the UC faculty are commies. If you didn't know, I actually work for the University of California Office of the President. So some of his hobbies. He was obsessed with Drake. Not Drake Hughes, Sir Francis Drake. He poured through Army Corps of Engineering records, Coast Guard records, and Drake's own records, and was able to pinpoint the exact spot that Drake landed in Drake's Bay. And in this picture here are, who are these guys? President of the California Historical Society, curator of Buckland Abbey at Plymouth, the British Consul General, and they're all gathered around a gold replica of a drum used by Drake on the voyage. So for some reason, the Admiral was very obsessed with this obscure piece of history. Glad I've never wasted my time on such silly things like that. And this is an excerpt from that Potter book, which I really kind of jumped out at me. It said, you know, like many people returning from combat areas, he had a little bit of trouble adjusting to civilian life, obviously. It says, after years of heavy responsibility, of meeting great challenges, of making momentous decisions, he could scarcely endure the futility of his daily pursuits. To lend them apparent weight, he scheduled everything strictly. And shortly after Nancy arrived, he proposed a pleasure expedition to Drake's Bay where everyone agreed to the proposal, and he announced we will leave at 11:05. And at 11:05, he was seated in the front hall and ready to go, and extremely irritated that not everybody else was ready. The party was underway in a quarter of an hour, but for Nimitz, accustomed to punctual obedience to his orders, that was a quarter of an hour too late. His day was ruined, and with unrelenting sullenness, he very nearly ruined everybody else's day. And it made me think of a time when another group of Berkeley sailors was being very impatient about getting to Drake's Bay. This was the finish line of the OIRA Drake's Bay race in 2015. You can see Bob Gunyon on the helm there, Doug and Hannah trimming the jib, and the rest of us sitting around with an expression on our face like, are we there yet? Well, they're sitting, I'm lying on my back like a lubber. And so some of Catherine's hobbies, she was very big into art. She did some paintings and sketches, and these are a couple pictures of her donating some of her paintings and sketches to the Brazilian Room at Tilden when this was when they dedicated Nimitz Way, which I'll show in a few more slides here. And again, I'm sorry for the blurriness of these pictures. These are ancient newspaper clippings that were scanned and uploaded to newspapers.com, and then I downloaded them and put them in a slideshow, and now I'm displaying them on a shitty laptop, so sorry, but this was the best I could do. This is one of her paintings called Fog Rolls into Redwood Park. And this is one of Mount Tam that she did while staring out her window. They were very big into philanthropy and fundraising. Chester was a Rotarian. He was always speaking at Rotary Club events. And in this picture here, he's actually working with a community chess drive on behalf of the USO. And he led a freedom crusade for Radio Free California to do some fundraising for Radio Free Europe. Catherine did even more fundraising than Chester. She was the commander of the Alameda branch of the American Cancer Society. She was the chairperson of the Friendship Fund for Holland to benefit Dutch flood victims. She served on the U.S. Committee for the UN International Children's Emergency Fund, and she organized many garden tea parties for the San Francisco Symphony Orchestra. And she also organized the Berkeley Sidewalk Art Show in 1957. That picture is with the, what does it say? These are Dutch guys. I think that's the Dutch consulate there. President of the Holland American Society. She's receiving an award for that work with the Friendship Fund for Holland in that picture. So recreation, there's that dedication of Nimitz Way in Tilden Park, which starts at Inspiration Point. They paved a trail that goes all the way out to the old Nike missile sites, and they named it Nimitz Way. One of his favorite hobbies was to just go for walks in Tilden Regional Park and spread wildflower seeds. Apparently a lot of the plant life up there is the result of him going for walks and throwing seeds on the ground. And he was very big into horseshoes. He organized several horseshoe tournaments in Oakland. And there's even a story in one of those books about how he was in Washington, and I forget whether it was Truman or FDR. I think it was FDR. He found out that the World Horseshoe Champion was in town, and so he called up the president, and the president cleared his desk and basically shanghaied this poor guy and made him play horseshoes at the White House for an afternoon. No idea if that's a true story. And of course, they were dog lovers, which I would argue is the worst quality of a BYC member. You people and your dogs. Tell you, me and Ibrahim have big ideas for this club. And so I mentioned he was in a ceremonial role. Here's some of that ceremony. When the USS Missouri was on its way up to Bremerton to join the mothball fleet before becoming a museum ship in Hawaii, it stopped in San Francisco, and Nimitz went on deck for a ceremonial visit. That picture on the left there is him saluting a couple of Cub Scouts right next to the plaque commemorating the signing of the surrender. And the picture on the right is him awarding the Eagle Badge to Eagle Scouts. He was a scout himself. I did not find any information about whether or not he actually attained the rank of Eagle Scout, but apparently he was at least in the Boy Scouts when he was young. And this picture on the left is him presenting a trophy, I guess to the Inverness Yacht Club. It doesn't say in the caption, but it says that they're in Inverness and he's presenting a yacht racing trophy. And then the picture on the right is him presiding over a wreath laying ceremony at an opening day parade. And this picture really made me stop and think. This is in the control room of the USS Nautilus, which was the first nuclear-powered submarine. It made a stop in San Francisco, and Nimitz, and that's Admiral Charles Lockwood right next to him. Both of them went aboard, and that's a picture of Nimitz operating the bow planes of a nuclear submarine. And what made me stop and think about this was he was born in Texas in 1885. The primary engine of transportation was the horse. He saw the horse, the Model T, Kitty Hawk, diesel engines, and finally nuclear propulsion in a submarine throughout his entire life. Like, I think about the technological advancements over the course of my life so far. It's pretty much the internet and smartphones, right? Like, profound change on society, to be sure, but it sure seems like going from horse to nuclear power, dropping nuclear bombs on cities, is quite a bit wider of a technological gap than anything I've ever experienced. And I don't know for sure, but I think this may be the last known public appearance photo of him. This is at a Cal football game when Cal football played the Naval Academy in 1964. And Cal called that Nimitz Day, and they had a little ceremony for him at halftime. And the account in the Potter book says that he received a standing ovation when he came out onto the football field at halftime. And that's Clark Kerr right next to him, who was the chancellor of Cal at the time. You may have heard that name if you've ever been on pretty much any UC campus, but especially Berkeley. They have an entire campus called the Clark Kerr campus.
Yeah, but who won the game?
You know, that's in the book, but I don't actually remember.
Oh, we'll just call it Cal.
Cal, yeah. I think Army won that game, actually. So yeah, that's certainly the last picture I have of him. I don't know if there are any more after that date. He died in 1966, so there weren't too terribly many opportunities for him, and his health had already started to deteriorate by this point. But, 1964, I don't think we had any forces on the ground yet in Vietnam, but certainly the bombing campaigns were underway, and there was a lot of anti-war sentiment, but apparently he stepped out onto the football field and received a standing ovation from the Berkeley crowd, so good for him. So in 1963, his health had started to deteriorate, and he moved into Quarters 1 on Yerba Buena Island. And the main reason for this was so that the Navy could provide him with 24/7 medical care. And Quarters 1 is still there. It's right under the new Bay Bridge. That's the old Bay Bridge in that picture, obviously. But I've heard it's boarded up and in a state of disrepair. If you scan that QR code, there's a YouTube video tour of the interior of it that Marilyn actually forwarded to me. So you can check that out. But that is where he was when he died on February 20th of 1966. And he is buried out in San Bruno at the Golden Gate National Cemetery alongside Catherine. She actually lived for another 13 years. But you can see his tombstone there has the 5 stars of his rank at the top there. And in the plots right next to them are Charles Lockwood, Ray Spruance, and Richmond Kelly Turner. He wanted to be buried with his men, so the 4 of them had a pact that they would be buried together with their wives in that plot at Golden Gate National Cemetery. And I'm sorry for the angle of the sun on this picture. It was morning when I went out there to take that, and I couldn't really get a good angle, but hopefully you can read that. And later that year, we had the Berkeley Marina dedication and the first ever Nimitz regatta. That is Commodore McMahon in the center there. And we had both a sailboat race and a predicted log race. This is 1966. So I think at Old Salt's next year, I want to research this a little bit and see what I can find, because it'll be the 60th anniversary, I guess. But yeah, that started the tradition of the Nimitz Regatta. You'll see a couple of trophies on the pool table that are Nimitz Regatta trophies. I'm told that none of those are the original Nimitz trophy. I looked around, I couldn't find it. I've never seen it. I don't know what it looks like.
It was a statue holding up a flame, and Sally Green referred to it as Chester the Molester.
It was a statue holding up a flame.
Sort of like the Statue of Liberty, but I think the holder was naked.
Okay, and the holder was naked. So I actually read through some of our Now Hear This articles, and the Nimitz Regatta is mentioned in a lot of them. mostly as a predicted log race, a couple times as a sailing regatta. But there was, in a lot of those articles, they talk about how boats from Richmond won and the trophy went back to Richmond and we were trying to get it back. So it's entirely possible that the Richmond Yacht Club has our trophy. I've never actually been in the Richmond Yacht Club, so I don't know, but if anyone happens to be in there, look around for the Nimitz trophy. And this picture on the right here, I just included because I found it interesting. That guy in the middle, that's Armin Kotitz. If you'll recall from my submarine talk, we found that article eventually that the Berkeley Harbor Master was responsible for punching the hole in the submarine and building our deck over the top of it. That's the guy. That's Armin Kotitz, who was responsible for putting the hole in that submarine. And this was in the same article as the first Nimitz regatta. So I think that's the end of my presentation.
That was excellent.
Thank you. I don't plan on getting any awards from the National Maritime Historical Society for my scholarly research here, but I hope it was at least somewhat entertaining.
What's your next one?
I'm taking a break after this one. Any questions that I probably can't answer?
Colin, when you went over the timeline, he was a young, enthusiastic officer during World War I. There's not a mention of World War I in your timeline, beginning from the wrong coast. But did you ever come across anything you got out of World War I?
Well, he did the underway refueling for the destroyers in World War I.
I thought that was that became the practice.
Yeah, that was the first experiments of it. But I think, let me back up to that timeline here. And yes, I skipped. There are huge gaps in my research here, but World War II. Yeah, right here. So yeah, he was 1913. He was over in Germany. We hadn't taken sides yet at that point, but 1916 he returned to New York. So yeah, he crossed the pond with the fleet, but honestly, I don't know what he did. I think most of the naval battles of World War I were the British, not the Americans. So, any other questions? Good, because my throat is really dry.